I don't want to end up in an argument with Tammy.
Holmes never imagined his life would collide so violently with the machinery of reality television, nor that his role as the sometimes comedic, sometimes stabilizing figure on TLC's hit series would catapult him into a legal and moral battlefield that now threatens to dismantle not only his family's livelihood but the very foundation of a billion-dollar entertainment empire. To understand how a man from Kentucky found himself squaring off against a network synonymous with voyeuristic spectacle, one must retrace the slow unraveling of trust, the financial shadows, and the relentless pursuit of ratings that ultimately culminated in the scandal now referred to in hushed tones online as Chris versus TLC. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, with whispers of unequal pay and favoritism, and has since grown into a full-throated accusation of exploitation, deceit, and betrayal. Fans who once tuned in for weight loss triumphs and family drama now pore over leaked documents, dissecting every rumor, every slip of information, every evasive response from the network. What began as entertainment has metastasized into a cultural reckoning, and at its heart stands Chris Combs, the unlikeliest of whistleblowers, propelled into the spotlight not by vanity but by necessity, and perhaps, by a sense of justice that reality television could never quite script. Chris's rise to prominence was never about him. The cameras came for Tammy and Amy, the Slaton sisters whose lives were raw material for TLC's machine. The premise was simple: women grappling with obesity, health crises, and the hope of transformation. Their storylines were compelling because they contained both tragedy and possibility, the two elements that fuel the genre. Chris was initially background, family furniture in the frame, until viewers noticed his grounded humor, his sly quips, and above all, his willingness to stand in the gap when the family's chaos threatened to spiral. He was, as fans would later describe him, the glue. While Tammy's segments often sank into sorrow and Amy's veered toward unpredictability, Chris became the balance, pragmatic, sometimes stern, but always warm-hearted. His presence tethered the narrative. TLC recognized his appeal but, according to insiders, did not reward it proportionally. His screen time increased, his role expanded, yet the numbers on his contract lagged far behind. The tension built slowly, like pressure beneath the Earth's crust, until at last it erupted. The scandal ignited when Chris began to voice concerns privately about compensation. He had been informed, through back channels, that TLC was profiting astronomically from the sisters' show, particularly through international syndication and streaming platforms. Episodes replayed across continents, generating millions in advertising revenue. Merchandise, spin-off specials, and digital exclusives expanded the brand. Yet when Chris examined his own paycheck, it reflected a fraction of the wealth his presence helped secure. The numbers didn't add up, and the more he compared his situation to industry standards, the clearer the imbalance became. Reports suggested that while comparable reality stars on other networks were pulling in six-figure salaries per season, Chris and his sisters were making less than many cable production assistants. For years, fans had speculated about the family's pay, incredulous that such a popular franchise didn't afford them obvious wealth. Now, as documents trickled into public view, those suspicions seemed vindicated. The heart of the scandal lies not merely in low pay but in alleged deception. Sources close to the family have claimed that TLC obscured earnings, bundling profits into shell companies, diverting streaming royalties, and burying clauses in dense contracts that exploited the Slatons' lack of legal sophistication. Chris, unlike some of his relatives, refused to look the other way. He began keeping notes, asking questions, even approaching lawyers for preliminary consultations. His stance was risky. Networks are known for their ruthless efficiency in silencing dissent, and TLC's track record suggested they would tolerate almost anything except public exposure of their finances. Chris's inquiries, once dismissed as grumbling, became formal challenges. He reportedly requested copies of contracts, accounting records, and licensing agreements. When those requests were met with deflections and vague assurances, suspicion deepened. By the time whispers of legal action surfaced, it was too late for the network to contain the narrative. The extended family also felt the blow. Misty, Amanda, and the other siblings had relied on Chris as mediator, the steady presence who prevented family disputes from escalating into explosive scenes that left lasting scars. When Tammy screamed, when Amanda's temper flared, When Amy sobbed, Chris was often the one who spoke calmly, diffusing tension before it tipped into something irreparable. His absence meant those same conflicts might now ignite unchecked, leading to more dramatic television moments, yes, but also alienating fans who were tired of relentless negativity. The Slaton family, always complicated in their loyalties, faced the prospect of being turned further against one another, not because of their own intentions but because the one who bridged their differences had been removed. Chris's lawsuit had peeled back more than just his own grievances. It revealed fissures in the family's relationship with TLC itself. They now knew in concrete terms just how far the network was willing to go to safeguard its interests and how easily replaceable they were in the eyes of executives. The family had always understood on some level that TLC manipulated storylines, that producers encouraged conflict, that privacy was sacrificed for profit, but Chris's confrontation forced them to face the cold truth: they were commodities. Stars as long as they played along, expendable the moment they pushed back. That knowledge seeded distrust, resentment, and unease behind the cameras. Producers who once enjoyed easy access to the family's secrets now faced hesitation, guarded responses, and simmering animosity. The scandal drew attention to a broader cultural issue as well. Viewers were no longer content to consume reality television at face value. Audiences were increasingly savvy about how networks manipulated editing, controlled narratives, and exploited vulnerability. Chris's lawsuit became a symbol of every unfair contract, every silenced star, every family whose pain had been monetized while their dignity was stripped away. He became, unintentionally, a representative of all the issues plaguing reality TV contracts, his personal fight magnified into a larger exposé of an industry built on imbalance. As fans speculated about the show's future, three options emerged. 1. TLC could double down, ignore the criticism, and continue exploiting drama as usual. 2. The Slatons themselves could renegotiate or even walk away, forcing the network to reconfigure its strategy. 3. A middle ground might emerge, where Chris's departure served as a cautionary tale that pressured producers to tread more carefully. Yet, as viewers debated these possibilities, many admitted their growing discomfort with just how enmeshed the family had become, not only with the cameras but with one another. The closeness of the Slatons, once celebrated as heartwarming, had begun to show cracks. Fans pointed out how often the siblings blurred boundaries, inserting themselves into every aspect of one another's lives. The show thrived on this intimacy: shared hospital visits, confessions about relationships, candid commentary on diets and failures, but in the long run, some viewers wondered whether the lack of boundaries was more harmful than helpful. The Slatons were too close, some argued, constantly in each other's business, commenting on personal matters that should have remained private, judging one another openly, and fighting viciously when lines were crossed. The very closeness that made them compelling on screen also made them combustible. It hadn't always been this way. The family's history was marked by fracture as much as unity. Their childhood was not one of seamless togetherness. The siblings shared a mother, but not always a father, and their blended family left them scattered in loyalties and experiences. Misty had her own father. Chris and Amanda shared one, while Tammy and Amy shared another. This complicated family tree shaped the distance and difficulties of their early years. They were close in age, but not always close in spirit. They grew up not as a tight unit but as a group, learning, sometimes awkwardly, how to coexist. Over time, those bonds strengthened, forged through hardship and necessity. They learned to have each other's backs, realizing as adults what they had struggled to grasp as children, that being together was better than being apart. When 1,000-Pound Sisters debuted, it accelerated that closeness. Cameras forced them into each other's lives daily, amplifying bonds while magnifying conflicts. Fights and reconciliations became entertainment, but behind the curtain, the family truly grew closer, forced to confront one another in ways they may have otherwise avoided. They laughed together, cried together, held each other accountable, and in many ways healed old wounds. The show made them a unit, at least in public perception, but as the years passed, the very intimacy that once bound them began to strain. Boundaries dissolved. Every private struggle became public domain. Every mistake was picked apart by fans. Every disagreement was exaggerated by producers. While the family gained closeness, they also lost privacy. and in that trade, they risked losing themselves. Tammy's journey epitomized this tension. She had gone from villain to inspiration, from being vilified for her temper and resistance to becoming celebrated for her resilience and transformation. Her weight loss and eventual skin removal surgery had captivated audiences, but with her triumphs now behind her, fans questioned what more her story had to offer. Even Tammy herself seemed ambivalent, dropping subtle hints on social media that Season 8 might be the end. Her recent TikTok, where she liked a fan's comment about the show's potential cancellation, sent the fandom into a frenzy. Was she signaling that the show's future was in jeopardy? Or was she simply tired of living under the microscope, ready to explore life beyond the lens? For Tammy, the show had been both salvation and curse. It had given her a platform, support, and purpose, but it had also branded her, often cruelly, as the villain, the burden, the sister who couldn't get it together. With her transformation complete, surgery finished, weight lost, relationship secured, her arc seemed at an end. The show that once thrived on her volatility risked becoming redundant. Fans had tuned in to see her fight for her life. Now, with that fight won, what remained to be told? Amy, too, faced questions about her future. Her storyline had revolved around her desperate desire to become a mother, her struggles with weight, her marriage, and her eventual divorce. Now remarried and raising 2 young sons, her narrative risked stagnation. Without Chris to balance her chaos, fans worried her segments would descend into disarray or lose direction. Meanwhile, Amanda's presence, while undeniably dramatic, risked overwhelming the show with negativity. Her volatile temper and chaotic love life brought entertainment but also fatigue. Fans debated whether her constant feuds, first with Tammy, then with Amy, added intrigue or simply poisoned the family's unity. Misty, quieter and less controversial, often faded into the background. Chris, once the grounding force, was now gone. Without him, the family's delicate balance teetered. The truth was inescapable. 1,000-pound sisters had always been about Amy and Tammy. From the very beginning, they were the heart of the show, the reason fans tuned in, the ones whose journeys captivated millions. The other siblings enriched the narrative, but they were supporting characters in a story that belonged to the sisters. Fans admitted as much, declaring their loyalty to Amy and Tammy while expressing affection for Chris, Amanda, and Misty. But without Chris, and with Tammy and Amy's arcs seemingly resolved, the question lingered: was there still a story left to tell? Chris's lawsuit had started as a personal battle for fairness but ended as a symbol of something larger, the fragility of reality television itself. It exposed how networks profited from family pain while discarding the very people who made the shows possible. It revealed the cost of intimacy without boundaries, of contracts without compassion, of loyalty without reciprocity. Whether or not 1,000-pound sisters continued, Chris's absence would haunt it. His presence had been the thread stitching together humor, honesty, accountability, and family. Without him, the tapestry unraveled, leaving a show that might still function but would never feel whole again. And yet, for Chris, perhaps that was the victory. By walking away, by fighting even in defeat, he reclaimed his dignity. He left fans remembering not the man erased from the credits but the brother who had dared to speak the truth, who had given his family, and his audience, something real in a world too often distorted for entertainment. Fans had always considered Chris Combs the soul of the series, a man who, despite his flaws and struggles, carried himself with honesty and grounded wisdom that few reality stars managed to maintain when faced with the manipulations of network television. He had been the buffer, the brother who could look Tammy in the eye when she lashed out and still remind her that his words came from love, not judgment. He had been the steady shoulder for Amy when the pressures of motherhood, divorce, and public scrutiny bore down on her. He had been the family's humor when tension rose, cracking jokes that broke through tears, and he had been the voice of accountability, the one sibling who told uncomfortable truths when others hesitated. His lawsuit against TLC and his abrupt departure from 1,000-pound sisters came as a thunderclap not only to viewers but to the family itself, who suddenly realized the scaffolding holding them together on screen had been stripped away. Fans, however, did not believe Chris would ever bow his head and return to TLC's supervision after the public unraveling of his relationship with the network. They thought him too proud, too hurt, and too committed to principle to crawl back under the thumb of producers who had, in his eyes, exploited the family for profit. Many imagined him forging his own path, whether through candid interviews where he could finally speak without the censoring hand of contractual obligations, through social media where his wit and raw honesty could thrive unfiltered, or even through his own reality show, one that told the story of struggle and resilience without the glossy manipulations of corporate television. The uncertainty left the future of 1,000-Pound Sisters Season 8 hanging in the balance. Without Chris Combs, the dynamics shifted dramatically, and everyone knew the show would be quite different. For Amy Slaton in particular, Chris's absence was a devastating blow. He had been more than just her brother on camera, he was her anchor behind the scenes. When she felt overwhelmed juggling the demands of raising her children, battling her health issues, and meeting the endless expectations of filming, Chris was often the one to step in, steady her nerves, and remind her she wasn't alone. He had been the brother who sat with her during hospital visits, who reassured her when she doubted herself as a mother, who teased her lightly until she laughed again when tears were close. Losing him from the show meant losing that consistent ally. Fans feared her storylines might unravel into chaos without Chris by her side, and more than that, they worried Amy herself would lack the emotional support she required in the grueling process of filming season after season. Tammy Slaton faced an even more precarious position. While Amy leaned on Chris for comfort, Tammy had often been forced to confront him as her harshest critic. He was frequently the only one brave enough to stand up to her stubborn refusals, her excuses, her dangerous flirtation with self-destruction. Chris's bluntness cut through the fog of denial Tammy lived in for so long. He had told her when she was eating herself into the grave. He had called her out when she missed appointments. He had shown her, not with cruel judgment but with the clarity of a man who loved her too much to lie, what her future would look like if she didn't change. Fans worried that without Chris's hard truths and tough love, Tammy might slip backward into old habits, enabling cycles that TLC might find profitable for ratings but that could lead to tragedy for the woman at the center of them. Already, viewers had grown exhausted with Tammy's volatility, her tantrums, and her self-sabotage. Many admitted that Chris had been the one figure who made those storylines bearable, because his presence reassured them that someone in the family still held Tammy accountable. Without him, even the chaos risked losing its purpose, devolving into spectacle. The timing could not have been worse for TLC. The show's ratings had begun to plateau, and executives leaned heavily on Chris to carry segments when Tammy's health crises grew repetitive and Amy's personal life splintered. His scenes provided comic relief, emotional resonance, and relatability that audiences adored. Social media confirmed this, hashtags celebrating his one-liners, memes of his exasperated reactions, threads praising his steady influence. In many ways, Chris had become the show's heart. So when allegations emerged that he had been shortchanged, fans took it personally. They felt complicit, betrayed for investing their time, emotions, and loyalty in a network that seemed to exploit the very man who symbolized hope within the chaos. The backlash was immediate. Online petitions demanded transparency. Fan groups threatened boycotts. Advertisers, skittish in the face of controversy, quietly re-evaluated their partnerships. What might have remained a private dispute escalated into a full-blown PR crisis. Behind the scenes, panic set in. Executives convened emergency meetings, debating strategies to neutralize the scandal. Some argued for a quick payout, a discreet settlement to keep Chris quiet. Others feared that conceding would embolden him, encouraging other cast members across TLC's empire to demand audits. And indeed, the risk was real. If Chris proved underpayment, what would stop stars of other lucrative franchises from following suit? The precedent could unravel years of calculated exploitation. For TLC, the issue was existential. Networks thrive on asymmetry, leveraging fame against vulnerability, offering exposure instead of fairness. If that balance collapsed, so might their business model. For Chris, however, the calculus was different. He was not an aspiring celebrity desperate for camera time. He had entered the show already a husband, father, and working man. Fame was incidental, not foundational. His sense of self-worth was not tethered to TLC's validation. This gave him leverage. He could walk away, but more importantly, he could fight. And fight he did. When early negotiations faltered, Chris escalated. He spoke to journalists, hinting at the disparity. He hinted at contracts so skewed they bordered on predatory. He refused to sign extensions without amendments. Insiders say TLC attempted to isolate him, painting him as difficult, ungrateful. But the strategy backfired. Viewers remembered his kindness, his patience with Tammy, his jokes with Amy, his earnest pursuit of health. They believed him. The network's smear campaign only deepened the rift between producers and the public. The family dynamic grew fraught. Tammy and Amy, still dependent on the show's revenue, faced impossible choices. Supporting Chris meant jeopardizing their own financial security, but aligning with TLC risked alienating fans and betraying their brother. Tensions simmered on set. Conversations once light-hearted turned cautious, burdened by the weight of contracts and loyalties. Off-camera, tears flowed. Relatives confided in friends about sleepless nights, about the pressure to choose sides. The unity that once anchored them against the outside world fractured under the strain of corporate manipulation. Chris, though sympathetic, remained resolute. He insisted that fairness was non-negotiable, that dignity mattered more than temporary checks. His defiance inspired fans but complicated family bonds. The possibility of legal action loomed larger. Lawyers dissected potential claims: breach of contract, unjust enrichment, emotional distress. The case for exploitation was strong. Reality stars, unlike traditional actors, surrender unprecedented access to their private lives. Every breakdown, every hospital visit, every argument becomes content. The psychological toll is immense, yet compensation rarely reflects this. If Chris's team framed his case not only as a wage dispute but as systemic exploitation, it could redefine industry standards. TLC, acutely aware of this, scrambled to prevent litigation. Settling quietly was tempting but dangerous. Fighting publicly risked exposure of financial records that could devastate their reputation. They were trapped, caught between silence and scandal. Meanwhile, fans transformed the controversy into a movement. Online, hashtags demanding justice for Chris trended regularly. Petitions amassed tens of thousands of signatures. Influencers and commentators dissected the scandal, amplifying every development. Even mainstream outlets began covering the story, framing it as part of a larger conversation about labor rights in entertainment. Chris became an unlikely symbol, his battle resonating far beyond Kentucky. People saw in him not just a reality star but a stand-in for all workers undervalued by corporations that profited from their labor. His fight was their fight, magnified on a global stage. As weeks turned into months, speculation grew about the show's future. Would Season 8 proceed without Chris? Could producers pivot to focus solely on Tammy or Amy? Insiders leaked that executives debated spin-offs, desperate to salvage viewership. But fans were clear: without Chris, the heart of the show was gone. Boycotts intensified. Advertisers hesitated. For the first time, TLC's once unshakable formula seemed vulnerable. The empire, built on exploiting intimate struggles, now faced collapse under the weight of its own greed. Legal analysts weighed in. Some argued Chris had a strong case, particularly if he could demonstrate intentional underpayment. Others cautioned that contracts often favored networks, designed to withstand scrutiny. Still, even the possibility of discovery, the process by which financial documents, emails, and internal communications could become public,